We're now in the town of Dilworth Town. This was the last scene of the fighting of the Battle of Brandywine. Now, basically, it was getting late. We're talking about possibly 5 o'clock, 5:30, when the army retreated to this area. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of cars and a lot of activity around here. You have 5 intersections that intersect into this area. Now, this would be a dirt area. The buildings are historically accurate. They date from the period. The building over here is historic. That's called the Dilworth Town Inn. I'll go into that in a minute. Now, as the Americans were retreating from Sandy Hollow, they encountered this area. Now, as you can see, this would have been complete woods, not woods, but really farmers' fields at the time. They entered this area, at which time the army started to break up. They got reports from Washington that Chad's Ford had been taken, that they crossed the Brandywine, and that the rest of the British Army, about 6,000 Germans and British, were engaging on this area. Now, what they did is they retreated to the west. They went this way. Now, reports are that the army broke up and reported to Chester. That is absolutely correct. But not before they gave the British that were invading this area the last volley. Now, they were right up around about 100 yards to the west. Now, our mounted cavalry was still intact because cavalry can move around the battlefield a lot faster than soldiers can. So late in the day, just as it was getting dark, the British were in this area. And as one British officer said, he was so impressed that Washington mounted one last cavalry charge into this area and came in and killed a lot of people with sabers and also a lot of musketry. I don't think that they were very mad about the situation. They just wanted to give one last hurrah. Now, this area is very historic in a couple of different ways, because this was the end of the battle, the flanking maneuver end of the battle. Now, General Howe was in this area. Lord Cornwallis was in this area. And the rest of the British Army stopped right here in this area. They didn't advance further and attack the Washington's army anymore. Now, this has been hotly contested. Either too late, it got dark, they didn't want to have a night battle, or because of the march from Kennett Square and the fighting that just took place over about 4 hours, that the troops were tired, and I don't blame them. They probably had muskets that didn't work. They had to rest. There was a lot of wounded on the British side. Some reports say that some divisions of the British Army lost all their officers and almost about 60% of their men. Now, a lot of times the Americans told, go after the British, shoot the officers. They had gold rims on their hats. That made them an easy target. This building out here is the Dilworth Town Inn. That was owned by a local citizen. That was a tavern. Now, as the American Army retreated at sundown, the British Army did not advance on them. They stayed here in Dilworth Town. They camped in this general area after the battle. Now, what they didn't want to happen, they didn't want to let the Americans know that they weren't pursuing them. So basically what they did was there was inhabitants, some Quakers, some inhabitants in the area. The British rounded them up and put them in the basement of that building right there, the Dilworth Town Inn. They put them in the basement so they wouldn't go and run and tell Washington's army that they weren't pursuing them. So there's stories today about that being a ghost in the basement. Now, that building dates from about the same time, about 1760, when that was built. As you can see on the Dilworth Town Inn, there's 6 windows. 4 windows are the original structure, which would have been there. Now, as the Americans left and advanced towards Chester, Washington reported back to Congress in Philadelphia late around 12 midnight. He wrote a letter stating that they were pushed off the field of battle, but they kept their spirits high. So the soldiers were they wanted another go at the Redcoats. But unfortunately, a lot of stragglers were hurt. There was a lot of men in this general area in the woods that were injured. they couldn't advance with the army to Chester, and they stayed in this general army, in this general area. So what we see here at the Dilworth Town Inn wasn't the headquarters of General Howe, but high-ranking officers would have stayed in there, and they plundered it. Now, early on in the war in 1777, there was no orders not to plunder anything. They took what they wanted to. They went around to local inhabitants, and they took their sheep, they took hay, grain, alcohol, whatever they could get. They put it on their wagons, because basically, they didn't know where they were going to winter. The British Army stayed here, plundered the area for 5 days. Now, the reason why Howe stayed here 5 days is still contested. They could have went after the army in Chester, but he didn't. He stayed here, he refreshed his army, and also his reinforcements that took Chatt's Ford entered this area. So basically, for the next 5 days, Howe stayed in the area. He camped in this general area. I'm going to pan the camera. I'll show you where he encamped. Okay, what you see in back of me in this intersection here, you see a field back there. That's exactly probably what it looked like during the battle. Right over there, you would have seen Howe and all these tents over there. You would have saw tents over there. They were white, they would look like teepees. Now they would have been all over this whole entire area. They would have been encamped in this area because they didn't pursue that army. They let them go to Chester. Now during that time, they policed up the weapons that were left on the battlefield. Now the British stayed here 5 days. So basically what they had to do is they had to go out and find their dead. They had to find their wounded. And doing so, they came across a lot of American wounded. And I don't know if it's just the way it was back then, but British loyalty to the crown, they brought these people into camp, the Continentals that were injured. And the British surgeons helped these men out. One report, which is absolutely true, was Washington wrote Howe, which is incredible. Wrote Howe a letter saying, could you please send our surgeons in to Dilworth Town to treat our wounded? And Howe writes back to Washington in very elegant words, absolutely, send your best surgeons in and we'll be able to treat your men. So American surgeons had to come in this area and tend our wounded. So like I said, they were here for 5 days and the fighting was extremely fierce, but it ended late in the day. And the biggest problem about the flanking maneuver of the British was that Howe did not go after the army. He should have went down to Chester and he should have took care of them. He didn't take care of them, and because of that, he was removed from office about a year later and was replaced. He went back home. And, you know, to this day, it's still contested why he didn't go after the American army and crush them. He had a real good opportunity to take Washington out.